I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. If you just give the kind of quick 2 minutes of, your background before you started the company, what your company does, that would be great. Adam, if you can kick us off there.
My mom would be upset if I didn't let Roxanne go first, so
Okay.
I'll let her.
I was going in alphabetical order, to be fair. Go ahead, Roxanne.
Happy to. Okay, great. So I am Roxanne Petraeus. My background before this current venture maybe wasn't traditional startups. I was an active duty Army officer for 7 years. So served overseas and in the US. And then bootstrapped my first company leaving the Army. Enjoyed the process and definitely thought a lot about raising versus bootstrapping in that experience, and then ended up selling to a local competitor and worked at McKinsey for like just about a year, and did not love like a corporate environment, but was appreciative of kind of understanding how some of the larger companies do it. And then from McKinsey ended up starting this current venture, which is Ethena. And what we do is probably what most people hate most about working in corporate America, which is compliance training, often really bad, boring, check the box. But we've tried to take a consumer approach to it. So things like making all training digestible, so 5 minutes every month instead of 2 hours that you click through while YouTube is open on the side. Using academic best practices, because not surprisingly, some of these topics such as anti-harassment are actually really important, and the training being boring and ineffective can be really detrimental to companies. And it's all e-learning, software-based, so we tend to work really well for scaling companies in New York and California, where there are training regulations. So if anyone is working at a company with one or more individuals in New York, you're actually mandated by the state to train. There are many other good reasons to train, but not being out of compliance can be one of them. And then we raised a pre-seed in October of last year, and we raised our seed round in April of this year. Anything else that would be helpful for intro context?
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Adam?
Cool. So my name's Adam Weinstein. I'm the founder and CEO of ThriveFantasy. Essentially, Thrive is a daily fantasy sports and esports platform for player props, or prop bets, if that's more familiarized as a term. So I launched in 2016, November of 2016. I knew from day one that I would need to raise money and a good amount of capital at that. It's a very cost-intensive market, specifically for customer acquisition costs, and then more importantly, to have big prize pools to generate interest for users. So unlike Roxanne, it took us quite some time to go from our pre-seed or our friends and family raise to closing our seed round. I closed my friends and family round in January of 2017. And then we just finalized our seed round by fully closing and oversubscribing actually in May of 2020. So definitely a big gap there, but happy to talk about anything and everything when it comes to fundraising. I've definitely been through pretty much any type of medium or difficult process that someone can imagine. So,
So the first way I'll kick this off is the decision to raise and how much. And if you can kind of take us to the beginning of your process. And for one, what was your perception of what kind of goals you needed to get to in order to raise? And did that actually play out as you went to go fundraise? And how did you figure out how much money? Did you have sort of a really in-depth, sort of financial plan and all this sort of stuff? Or is it like, look, I'm going to hire 5 people, I'm going to work with them for 18 months and like, here's the number. Roxanne, how did you decide how much to raise, and what did you actually show up with? Was anything built, or how did that work?
Yeah, so we were able to put a like a product in the market really quickly. I think like basically concurrent with our pre-seed round, we had launched a beta. It had gone well, so we were able to demonstrate like, some traction and learning from that. And then we had our V1 had been live for maybe 2 months before we were really raising our seed round.
Was that
And
because
so
it
we
was
were
content? So it essentially you could put something out there with mostly a time investment.
It was, yeah, we had a couple things going for us. Like my co-founder is the CTO, and so she was able to spin up some stuff pretty quickly using a lot of off-the-shelf software. We had access to content creators, and then our approach is like a digestible drip campaign, and so it's not like we needed a huge capital investment in order to get folks started. And I think our mindset was very much of the like iterate, and so we were comfortable saying like, okay, we've launched with something that in retrospect is like early, but was better than the current solution. So folks were willing to adopt it.
So you had that when you went to go raise your pre-seed.
Yeah, we had like a really MVP, but it was, we could at least show them like, here's what we think it's going to be. And in retrospect, it may have been like a little bit too. It was pretty minimal, but it was enough to demonstrate. But I found that our pre-seed really was just kind of on vision. We maybe had like one or two people ask us for like a financial model, and then quickly realized like this is that just didn't make, either you kind of bought where we were going or not. I could make a very built out Excel, but it was still not really demonstrating anything real. And then for our seed, when we had talked to people about what we would need to demonstrate kind of pre-COVID, we definitely got a sense that it would be more similar to our pre-seed in that it was like vision, are there a couple of customers who are jazzed about what you're doing? And then do they believe in the fact that your team can build it? I would say COVID, I'm not sure if it was just our experience or what, but it definitely started, the questions ended up morphing a lot more into like more detailed questions, I think because investors, whatever model they had been using, they figured it probably doesn't apply to the new world. So things like, can you justify your pricing in a recession? Like those sorts of questions started to come up, which I'm guessing would not have happened had the market kind of continued a pace where it might have been like you can still kind of raise on sort of vision, team, things like that.
And your pre-seed, did you set an amount, or did you just say, hey, I'm going to spend a little time, we'll gather up as much capital as possible, then we'll just kind of go from there? Or were you trying to, like, this initial X $100,000 is for getting to this specific place, which we think could raise a seed, or we think could, like, what was the goal in the pre-seed round?
Yeah, so in the pre-seed, we did set an amount. We ended up being oversubscribed, and we're excited about some of the people who wanted to join. So we raised over what we had intended. But to your point, we just sort of mapped out. I mean, it was very back of the envelope because it's like 4 people. Like basically how much does that cost? Something like that, with the idea that would get us to the next point where we could kind of demonstrate like a more live product that had more significant traction. And then for the seed, we demonstrated, I think it was like an 18-month runway, based on an assumed growth of the team. And we actually did it not including revenue because we just found that people, we were actually confident we had already had paying customers that there would be revenue, but given COVID, it seemed more helpful to demonstrate to investors that we could weather a storm confidently.
Gotcha. So Adam, 2017, you went to some people you knew and pulled something together, which, what's your take on, if you think back to that time period, did you think about raising more? Did you just try and get a product into the market? What was sort of the thinking of like just that particular round?
Yeah, so for our friends and family / pre-seed, whatever people like to call those, it was strictly to get from concept to an app or platform into the market. 90% of that money was going towards the technology.
Mm-hmm.
So we already mapped that out. We knew exactly what it was going to look like. And then the extra 10% that we needed was for 1 or 2 hires for 3 to 6 months in terms of how long I can pay them and keep them on board. So yeah, that was very mapped out. The pre-seed was very mapped out. Seed was vastly different than that, considering we thought that we'd be closing our round in early 2019 or late 2018. That was not the case at all. But the pre-seed, what's nice is if you are outsourcing the tech, that you know pretty much exactly or close to what it's going to cost you, how long it's going to take, all that good stuff, which we did that due diligence prior to raising that money.
Did you think that that was, in hindsight, thinking about the kinds of questions that investors had and what they had now and the amount of traction that you were able to get with the product, do you feel like you couldn't have gone, or maybe you did try and go to other types of investors before the product? Or did you just say, hey, you know what, like we need to raise because we need a product and it's not worth talking to anybody without a product?
Yeah, there'd be, considering like the industry I'm in, daily fantasy sports, there's two just such behemoths, FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm not scared to tell their name anymore. It doesn't matter. They're both doing exceptionally well. If we didn't have a product to show, there's literally 0% chance that anybody would ever contemplate investing in myself and our concept. You need something in the market in this space. You need something that's working, that's new, that's refreshing before anyone would even take you seriously. And even into our seed round, we had a whole ton of traction. We did $800,000 in handle. We paid out $800,000 worth. We're integrated with PayPal. We're complying with all these state regulations. And still everybody was like, you're too early for us. So if I went to them prior to an app, they probably wouldn't have responded to me. And if they did, they would have left. So clearly, depending on the industry and what you're raising and who you're asking, it sways where you need to be in that space before talking to people.
Gotcha. And I think this is, the contrast really points out one of the difficulties that I think people have with fundraising is that not every plan is appropriate for every company, right? The fact that you've already got two larger companies out in market is something that, you know, the cost of admission for fundraising for you was having something that was getting traction, right?
Yep.
Whereas, you know, Roxanne, in your business, it seems like there just wasn't actually a go-to product in that space, a huge player that everybody was using, so that you could afford to have something that was a little more off the shelf, because it sounds like you had more white space in the area that you were going after.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, our space is pretty fragmented, the e-learning market in general, compliance training in particular. And so I think it was a bit easier to, you know, it's not like we're in a capital intensive type of company, at least for how we've started. And we found that it would be, it was like to our benefit to demonstrate what we could do with very little, because it just sort of, you could then connect the dots to, like, if we have a seed round, here's what more we can do with it. And so we just found that kind of selling something that was the fewer leaps of faith that investors had to take with us, we figured the better.
Gotcha. Okay, so you decided to go out and talk to some investors. Just how do you make that list? What was the process of, you know, researching, figuring out like who you should pitch, you know, kind of getting your deck together? What was your list like initially? So Roxanne, why don't you start out and actually be curious as to the difference. Did you decide we're definitely going to do a pre-seed and we're definitely going to do a seed, or like was there any thinking that like maybe you would just see how much you could raise on vision, and if by some magic it's $2 million, then you'll take it? Or was it basically you were going for a small amount from particular pre-seed angels? Like, how did you sort of make the list at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, on the kind of how we thought about structuring our raises, We definitely debated early on, like, do we want to bootstrap this? I had the experience of doing it, and we, for a variety of reasons, thought it didn't make sense for what we wanted to do, but we definitely did like think about it, and kind of put some like genuine thought into modeling it out and seeing like, is there a viable path, and are we more excited about that? But we decided that the venture-backed route made sense for what we wanted to do here. And then in terms of pre-seed versus seed, we definitely had a lot of discussion as our pre-seed was going, and then it was oversubscribed. We thought like maybe we just keep the round open and kind of do it like all right now. We saw
for individuals in the pre-seed, or a mix of both.
A mix of both. So Ali Partovi's Neo was kind of like the anchor, the pre-seed fund from out west, and then angels and funds like Village Global, you know, yep, and January Ventures, and then just about everyone else was angel investor.
Gotcha.
Individual.
And when you made the list, did you just kind of start with your network and who knew somebody, or did you take a much more objective, like, let's go to Crunchbase and see who's in the HR space, or let's see who's tweeting about these issues?
Yeah.
Like, how did those people wind up on the list?
Yeah, we definitely relied pretty heavily on like Neo was our first, and they have a really great network of investors who they then referred us to, and we kind of talked about what we were looking for.
How did you find them, or they found you? Or
my co-founder was in their network from early on. She's a software engineer, and so she was, I want to say, like a Neo scholar, or they have some term. So she had been pretty familiar with them. So we had talked with them. I think I needed to talk to their head to kind of like convince my co-founder to join me in doing this. So, you know, basically from day zero, we'd been connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they helped us to source some individuals. We would say like, hey, we're looking for someone with e-learning experience. And they would say like, okay, we got a couple of folks who we think might be a good fit. We didn't do a ton of cold, like true cold prospecting. And so we asked like fellow founders, you know, who's on your cap table, who's really like added value. And I think that ended up being, I'm really glad we did, because we felt pretty confident that we knew what we were getting with everybody going in. And it seems like it's like largely reflected kind of the references we had heard.
Gotcha. Did you get any references that actually made you not pitch anybody?
Yes.
Gotcha. And what were you, over and above just like basic character standards, what were the kind of things that were important for you as you were sort of putting people on that list? Is it just the industry familiarity, or were you looking for a particular kind of, you know, reference?
I think we were definitely looking for a particular style of investor. We've been told are like highly collaborative, and we actually sort of like bouncing ideas off of our investors. And one paradigm that references had used is like, some is just a check. So like they're going to write you a check and you'll never hear from them. And like that can be great if that's what you're looking for. But we actually felt like we might be looking for a little bit more like, you know, we have this idea for a partnership, and you've seen a lot of reps at this. Like that's just our, as founders, that's our style. And so we were looking more for the, I'm sure there's a better term for it, but essentially like more collaborative, not just a check type funds. Whereas I know other founders who've said like, I don't enjoy talking to my investors. I want them to invest and I will like return, you know, well, but I don't want to have like monthly check-ins. And that just wasn't our style.
Gotcha. So Adam, how did you make your list? And also I'm just sort of curious about like, what tipped for you? Because you were hoping to raise earlier, and somehow, I don't know if it was just that you got better on the 75th pitch than you were on the first one, but like, what do you think happened over that period? Or maybe it was like the industry, or?
Yes, so a lot happened, obviously, when we thought we were going to raise to when we closed. But to answer your first question in terms of the list, you just hit the nail on the head. Like the first 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 pitches that you're going to make as a founder, if you haven't done this before, you might think that they're good pitches, but they're probably crap. So you should definitely be always iterating, see what hit, see what didn't. I've actually pitched, and it's been video recorded back in 2018. And I'm like, wow, that was so bad for so many reasons. So definitely don't hit everybody that you want to at the very beginning, because you need that practice, right? This is something that's your baby, but no one else knows what it is. You're going to stumble over words. You're not going to be able to speak on it as well or as properly as you'd like to. So when it came to my list, I'm on LinkedIn 24/7. I'm on Gust. I'm on TechCrunch. I'm on AngelList, as you mentioned. Hit up everybody as a first-time founder, if you are, as raising a seed round. Like, no one is below you in terms of who you should be talking to. And even if they're not in the correct space for you, they might know someone. If they like you, they might reference you over to someone. So don't just be like, oh, they don't invest in X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter. Take that 2 minutes to research them and what they've invested in. Say, I like what you've done, X, Y, and Z. Would love to give you a pitch. If they say no, thank you, no worries. It's, again, 2 minutes. We're, as founders, our whole objective is to keep the lights on. So don't act like you're above anybody or anything. Spend that time. Go to these networking events. Even if you're like, damn, I really don't want to do this, just freaking do it and pitch.
Were you doing cold outreach?
I started with a couple warm. So my background, I worked at the Yankees in sales for 3 years. So I'm comfortable talking to everybody and anybody. I went from inside sales to premium sales there. So right before I left, I had a book of business of $12 million in Yankee season ticket holders. So I had the top of the top when it came to New York clientele. But quickly, when you don't have that at yankees.com email address, they quickly don't care about you nearly as much. But again, my whole goal was numbers, right? Like I'm a mass follow-up guy. Like, I'll reach out to anybody. And again, you have to do that as a first-time founder. If you don't have that background, if you haven't sold companies, no one cares about you. No one knows what you're doing. So you just have to put your name out there to as many spots as possible. So
just out of curiosity, did you follow up with any former clients to pitch?
100%.
We won't tell the Yankees.
Yeah, no, I don't care. It was a mutual departure. I told them I'm leaving to found a company. Yeah. But yeah.
I think that's an important thing, though, that a lot of people don't do. Like, when I was first raising my fund, after my first close ever, I literally emailed, and unfortunately you can't do this on LinkedIn anymore, but you used to be able to just download every email address of every LinkedIn contact, and there's ways to hack it or pay Clearbit or what have you, and mass emailed everybody. Hey, I just did my first close. Here's what kind of companies I'm looking for. But then a note at the end of, here's why the investors who backed me, here's what they believe, here's why they came in. And that mailing, which went out to, over the course of a week, thousands of people, netted me over $1 million.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is, in the next 5 years, the #1 go-to for entrepreneurs. I'm in a ton of different entrepreneurial networks, and maybe 5 to 10 people are actually utilizing LinkedIn to its potential. People are having trouble raising. I'm like, how often are you on LinkedIn? They're like 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. I would hit my message request maximum every day on LinkedIn for over a year. That just hit people up, again, they limit you to now with a message request like 150 characters. Have a pretty streamlined 3 to 4 sentences on who you are and what you're doing. Would love to connect and just hammer everybody. So like on Gust, you can see who's part of New York Angels or part of all these angel groups. They'll give you a list of every member on those angel groups. Literally LinkedIn every single one of them and have this streamlined 3 sentences and do it. Just put aside an hour or 2 every day on LinkedIn and hit them up.
Can I ask a question? Do you think that, given your background, that is a style that, like, you're just, from a personality perspective and all that sort of stuff, more comfortable with that?
Yes, but
you probably got a lot of rejections along those lines.
But you're never going to be a successful entrepreneur if you're taking rejection to heart. No offense to anybody. If they're like, oh, I just got rejected. No, that's not how this game works. That's not how the world works. I'll answer your question by saying yes, that obviously my background helped. But there's no, if you're uncomfortable being person to person or face to face all the time, LinkedIn mitigates all that. You don't have to be face to face. You're literally pressing buttons to connect with people who ultimately you're trying to get money from. So that, yes, it helps, but anyone can do what I'm doing. I haven't reinvented the wheel here. I'm just putting in the time and effort in order to try to make my goals.
What were some of the changes or pitch changes over time that you made, that you learned from some of those earlier rejections that weren't necessarily like specific to the industry or whatever, but maybe what you learned about what investors were looking for?
Yeah, like 1,000 different things, but really just streamlining your talking points. If you're rambling for a couple minutes, you're losing people's thought process so quickly. You need to keep them interested from the jump and have 2 to 3 sentences or 3 to 5 sentences on exactly what they want to hear, how you plan to execute it, and then just shut up. When you're really going on and on about random things, they're already judging you quickly, and they're like, this guy can't do it, or this female can't do this. I'm not interested. Like, you're asking them to invest money in you. Like, that's the hardest thing to get people to say yes to. So you really need to be sound when it comes to what you're saying.
Roxanne, you mentioned that there were some people who just got it right away and others who didn't. How did you, what kind of a message do you think resonated with the people who ultimately close? And did that change at all from the initial message? What was it that like got people over the fence?
Yeah, I think when unfortunately, if we realize like you can get pigeonholed very quickly, and in part like not even just thinking about it, sometimes the way you construct your email, the first sentence makes someone like an investor think like, oh, you're just X, you're kind of dead on arrival. And so I think that our problem initially, our message that didn't resonate was if someone saw us as like just, for example, compliance training, or even smaller, like just anti-harassment, or even candidly like women doing women's issues, and like, you know, then immediately the TAM becomes 0, even though like that's not necessarily the case. But so we really struggled initially to think about like, how do we explain what we're doing relative to what we're going to do, and connecting those dots of like, we're going to market with this product, but here's the vision. And when we flipped that and said like, here's the vision, and we went with this first thing, that went a lot better. A challenge that we had is getting candid feedback on what is and isn't resonating. Obviously, like, it's pretty obvious what is resonating, because they say like, you know, take my money. But it was really hard for us to understand what wasn't resonating and what precisely, because, you know, we've just, from even friends in venture, are quite aware, I don't know, Charlie, if this is your experience, but that the email that's like a no back does not contain why it was a no. It'll just say like something kind of generic that is like not the real answer. And they usually have like a pretty specific answer. And so it was definitely a little bit harder for us to, or I think it's just hard to iterate, because you're not getting that like very real feedback, unless you may be able to back channel or have a friend in venture who you can kind of ask for like, what's the most brutal critique, because there's not an incentive for VCs to give you that like honest reason. And so that's a little bit, I think, tricky, versus like sales, where sometimes someone will just be like, your price is too high. Like, got it. Like that's a little bit clearer, I think.
You laid it up for me, and I can't not then do this self pitch here. I just posted in the chat a tool that we built called feedback.vc, because we have seen the very same issue, particularly like when my companies, you know, I might lead a round, but the round isn't full. So we'll say, oh, let's go show it to so-and-so. And I've seen those emails, and they're completely inconsistent from one investor to another. Yeah. They're like, you know, this is not a fit. It's interesting. Come back to us later. But you don't know how close you are. So we actually built a tool where it's a blind panel of 10 real investors, and they rate your company based on a whole bunch of like objective criteria. So like team, yes or no, market, yes or no, and you actually get numerical, like a number. and you get it across all different areas, as well as some quantitative feedback. And what's interesting is some of the best feedback we've gotten have been from some of the founders who actually did the worst on it, because they were able to be like, oh, I'm not even close. Like I'm not even striking distance. I've got a lot of work to do, and I see where that work is. So it's called feedback.vc, and I just threw in a discount code in the chat. But it's part of the inspiration for it was, I remember talking to this one founder, and I told him that his company was a 7. And I was like, honestly, it's the worst kind of feedback I could give, because I can't give you any specific reason why this won't work. But it's just that I'm looking for like 9s. I'm looking for stuff that I'm like really psyched about, that I just think has this like outsized opportunity. And I can't even, it's definitely a business. It's just not one that I'm super excited about. There's nothing wrong. But I think as a VC, what normally people do is we make up something. Like if you're a 7, we'll come up with something that is like completely small and ridiculous, just because we feel like we have to come up with a reason to say no, even though like we're default no until it's a screaming yes. And sometimes we can't identify why it's not screaming yes, but it just isn't. And so we'll say something. And I think the other reason too is sometimes it's team. And only one time in my career have I actually ever just specifically said, it's you. And I honestly, you could imagine how well that went over, but I could not, it was a team that honestly I would have backed, but I just could not imagine anybody working for this founder. I thought they would have been just an incredibly difficult person to work with. And I tried to write that email any other which way possible. And at some point I was just like, I don't think anybody can work for you. Sorry, that's my feedback. And yeah, it didn't go well, but that sometimes is the reason.
How'd the company do?
I don't think they ever took off. I think the founder's probably still trying to work on it, but they didn't get funding. So we got a couple of questions. And before I keep going, I just want to jump in. So we talked about deciding which investors to pitch. Yeah, let's talk about actually the change in how people like walk through what they have versus a deck. And in particular, I think now, during this time period where the majority of folks that you closed in your most recent round, you did virtually. And I'd be curious, Adam, if you can sort of start off, how did you have a live product. Did you send it to people ahead of time and then pitch them? How did you actually work the virtual pitch, and how is that different than what you were doing in the past?
Yeah, so I just want to hit on one thing prior to answering this question.
Yeah, sure.
To the back one. But when it comes to VC responses, like some are laughable. Like it's like, this is too early for us, but their main page is, we write a check with just
First check, yeah.
We'll be first check with just an idea, but I'm too early for them with $500,000 in sales. Like all of this stuff, and Charlie, I know you're heading all of this, like a lot of VCs are just complete bullshit artists. Like don't waste your time or your mental capacity thinking that you're wrong. They're getting pitched 500 times a day or a week, and they pick 1 or 2 winners. So that's the reason why it's a numbers game for me. I'd rather pitch 100 people and get 3 like to the next step than spend weeks trying to hit 5 people. And if it's 0 out of 5, then you're completely screwed.
No, I agree with that. And I think the bad feedback can send entrepreneurs off in a direction that's like, oh, maybe we should raise a couple $100 grand from additional from our friends and family to go get more traction, and then they go get more traction and it's still not enough. And so that problem.
What Charlie wants might not be what Michael wants, might not be what Roxanne wants. If you ask 50 VCs what we should be raising at what valuation, you'll get 50 different answers. So just
one suggestion I would have on the too early thing, and what I have suggested to founders is two things. One is qualify your investors. So not just, what's on the website, but just, hey, I'm at this stage. I'm pre-deck, I'm pre-product, I'm pre-revenue, I'm at, 100 grand a month, 50 grand a month, 10 grand. I'm at this stage. How many founders have you backed in the last year at this stage? And did you have any relationship with them before you backed them, right? Because if you're sitting there and you're pre-rev, and it says on their website, yeah, occasionally we'll opportunistically do pre-revenue, but the answer in that meeting is 0, then the chances of you getting back is probably 0. So you're probably not talking to the right person. The second thing is, if I had a crystal ball and I had 100% certainty that you would do every single thing that you laid out in your deck, I'd be thrilled to pay everything pricing now at your 4 pre or 5 pre or 3 pre. Now it'd be a steal, right? The reason why somebody says it's too early is because there's something that you haven't done yet, that they have less than 100% certainty that you will be able to do. And I encourage founders to ask that question. What is it that we haven't done that you are skeptical or don't believe it's worth taking the risk now that we will be able to do to pay this price now? There's something in there, and some of it's, legitimate to say, you know what, yeah, that is really hard. I understand why you're taking the risk, but like at least walk out of that meeting knowing what it is. And sometimes they haven't really thought about it and they just gave you a BS thing. And sometimes it is literally, I don't think you'll be able to sell enterprise customers, or I don't think they'll be able to pay. But at least you know what it is. So
also, I feel like it's worth it just to jump in to do that for yourself too, because I've realized, like, as I get older, like your time is valuable as well. So we kind of set things of like what to us means we're succeeding, like as founders, and then the rest of the team. Like if we never are able to sell enterprise, like that is a problem. And so like set goals of, if we can't sell to a company over 6,000 people by this date, like and we just had a chart in particular in our first months, because it seemed pretty helpful to also like view your time as valuable. And yeah, those like sometimes align with what investors want, other times don't. But I just found that to be a pretty like sort of empowering exercise to just remember that like you have agency too, and if you don't think your company is working, that like is a problem.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
so Adam, tell me about the virtual pitching.
Yeah, so prior to COVID, I'll just give a little background on our full. So we raised $1 million. We oversubscribed to 1.05 million. What was nice for us is we had a lead investor with money in the bank already prior to COVID. So it's not like we were begging or scrambling during COVID or these Zoom calls to close, or else like we were closing our lights. So
you closed on a partial round first.
That's right.
Okay. Did you set a goal or agree upon a goal to say, if we have at least this much money, or did they just write a check?
Yeah, so we were on the same page. We said we'll close within X time. They said, okay, let's do it. And then literally a week before everything shut down, I was in person with the New York Angels. I made it past their due diligence on Gus. I pitched them in person. They said, let's move forward with more discussion. Then obviously everything shut down. So I had literally 7 or 8 follow-up Zoom conferences ranging from 3 New York Angels all the way up to 25. So I did cultivate a lot of those relationships prior. But yeah, the Zooms were wild. I'd have 26 questions in my chat box from 26 different investors at the same time. We would start at 9 a.m. and end at 1 p.m. sometimes, which in a real in-person would never happen, specifically the amount of times that it did. But I can't speak on starting a relationship strictly on Zoom because I already had those, but I can imagine it's quite different and much more challenging because you are dating these investors, right? It's hard to close on a first date or a first pitch. So having that in-person relationship is normally very critical. But what I can say is now that you know these investors are in front of their computer 24/7, so they're going to be seeing your emails or your LinkedIn requests. They're not traveling, they're not doing any of these networking events. So again, just hit as many as possible. I can't stress that enough.
Did you close, what was the timing of closing and, leagues were getting canceled? How did you address this sort of period of time where I'm sure like people probably didn't believe that sports were going away forever, but you had this time where like somebody is writing a check for a thing that is literally not happening right now? And how did you address some of those questions?
Sure. So a really massive pitch and opportunity was for us is we are doing esports player props and contests. So once we kind of realized that the sports route for investors wasn't very intriguing because again of the two bigger players in the space, and then we kind of didn't pivot because it was always top of mind to go into esports, but more so make that the primary pitch point, then we were getting a lot more traction and investor interest. So honestly, knock on wood, the fact that we had esports up and running during COVID, where a lot of these other competitors were not, that was a nice differentiation. And then the investors can say, oh crap, I see that this is really gaining traction for Thrive at this point. So that helped. And then B, we have a very lean team. Our burn rate was so low. So with our financial models, we had situation one where sports doesn't come back until 2021. We'll keep our burn rate this low and really hit on our esports partnerships. And then if NFL comes back, NBA comes back, MLB, this is the projections and all that. So we mapped out everything during COVID. But yeah, if esports and sports weren't happening for the last 4 or 5 months, I can say at a very high percentage that we probably would not have closed our round.
Gotcha. So Roxanne, did you meet investors that wound up participating in the round purely virtually?
Maybe some of the smaller participants in our seed round, but I was just trying to reflect on it. I think actually everyone we had met in person, but at some point, like it wasn't necessarily when I was actively pitching, it was just that we had met them before, had a warm intro, something like that. But our round was led by GSV. They do ed tech, and we had met them in person pretty early in the company's life. And then Homebrew last year, yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, so we had just given they were in the ed tech space, and so I do think it was probably easier. They had met both me and my co-founder at some point. So to Adam's point, like it is, I think, a lot harder to just like have a really amazing sort of first Zoom call.
Just obviously on the GSV point specifically, you met them earlier. Did you actually pitch them earlier, or you were just sort of going out there and saying, hey, we raised a seed, pre-seed, like what was that like? Because people talk about building relationships with investors, but no one actually talks very specifically about like, what is that? Like, how did you meet them? Did you reach out to them? Did you show them a deck? Did you tell them what you were going to build? Or was it just like you met them at an educational networking event or something?
If I'm remembering, I think that they had seen us when we had closed our pre-seed round, and it was covered in, we had a great article in TechCrunch. And so it, because they're ed tech, someone had reached out. And then there was another connection from like a existing pre-seed investor. They do a big ed tech conference. And then it was in person. So we were talking with them about how we could participate in it. And so there had been like natural points. Gotcha. Yeah, I really struggle with like just, in fact, COVID is sort of nice for me. I don't enjoy just like going to a massive networking event. That's like not, I think my personal proclivity. And so it was nice that the investors who we had met usually through like some purpose. Either maybe they had heard about us and they were reaching out and just kind of a cold conversation or something. And we did just try to stay in touch. In particular, when I knew that I was going out to SF or something, I would say like, I'll be in the area. And I do think that was pretty helpful because as I reflect on who ended up investing, there were people who we had like multiple touch points beforehand. Versus from a cold start.
Gotcha. And did you think about, did you change the nature of the round to either make it larger, extended? Were you more conservative about your, like how the runway and all of that sort of stuff once things started to kind of hit the fan?
Yeah, the timeline is like fuzzy because it was just such a weird time, but if I'm remembering correctly,
4 years ago, back in April.
I mean, but it feels like, because in particular, like I was fundraising, I think it was like the week of March 11th or something, where like New York shut, and I'm in Brooklyn, shut down, and so I was in SF, and then like took a red eye back because people were just like, clearly VCs had closed up shop like the last day I had meetings in person, and then all the rest of them got canceled and moved to virtual. So the way we thought of the round, we ended up closing like the round that we had anticipated in terms of the actual dollar value. I think it was like a little north of 2 million, 2.5. And that's like what we had set out to raise, and we raised it. We hadn't, like, the advice we'd been hearing pre-COVID was like, rounds are just going to get bigger. You're going to end up raising way over. But as it became clear that this was just a really tumultuous environment, we prioritized speed over maybe like keeping the round open and making it larger or something, because for us, the concern was we were closing a couple enterprise deals, and we thought that with everyone just being nervous about everything, if we can't demonstrate like really strong sort of like financial viability, it could be really scary as a vendor. And so we ended up thinking that the smartest thing for us, given that we could actually get back to work really quickly, is to close quickly. We had like an opportunity cost to raising, whereas I had talked to other founders who they were in like retail, and then it's just a totally different situation because it's like, what are you going to be doing right now anyway? So I think it was the big realization for us is like we're net. I mean, it's like. Terrible is probably a more sensitive way to say it, but we benefit from work from home. We're an e-learning solution in compliance that was traditionally done in person with lawyers. So we're like both cheaper, and we work for the work from home environment. And so our goal was just to get back to selling like as quickly as possible. And that meant that the only big change in our calculation was around how quickly we want to get this done versus how much or structure the round or something like that.
Gotcha. And actually for both of you, during this fundraising period, could you talk about like the time investment? Because you both had businesses running during this period. So how were you, what percentage of your time was dedicated to this? And what were some ways in which you potentially saved time or time hacks for being able to do both?
Yeah, I'll start. 70+% is raising. They say, and I don't know who said this, but I agree that raising a seed round is probably one of the hardest things to do in life, and I concur 100%. And yeah, our business is running every day, right? We are doing multiple sports, which happen every night. Right now, tomorrow with NBA, we're going to have PGA, NBA, MLB, and esports all running at the same time at different times. Esports happens at 5 in the morning. PGA kicks off, tees off at 9 in the morning. MLB's at 2 p.m. and then NBA's at 7 p.m. All of which, if this happened 4 or 5 months ago, I'm also trying to raise money. So it's just, it is what it is. You signed up for it as a founder. No one told you it was going to be easy, and if they did, they're lying to you or have never experienced it before. So it sucks, and raising money in a seed round when you don't have the traction and you don't have the team and you don't have 5 to 10 of the all-stars behind you, it is nearly impossible or very, very tough. And I don't like to sugarcoat it because that's not who I am. That's not how I was brought up. But you have to do it if you want your dreams to come true and succeed in this. It's a grind. So 70% of my time was that. There are no shortcuts in raising money. So it's not like you can be like, oh, I can do X, Y, and Z and raise. So you got to put the time in. There's no right answer to that. But over all your time is going to be trying to get people to like you, believe in your company and your vision, and get some checks into your company.
And how did that change or shift from like from getting out there to a bunch of people to like the moment you got a lead and agreed upon a term sheet, and then it was sort of filling the round?
Yeah, so that, and another misconception is once you find your lead, the ball will start rolling and everybody's going to come in. That's, at least for me, that wasn't the case. Like, obviously having that lead when they actually put the money in the bank is phenomenal because I'm not losing sleep that we're going to have to close tomorrow. But if people said no to you prior and like waiting for a lead, it's really hard to re-engage them. Some people will come back in for a small check, but once they say no to you, it's so hard to get them to come back and say yes. Really what you'd like to do is get that lead and then start hitting new types of people who are interested in your space and say, we have a lead, this is what we're looking for, and all that good stuff. But it was better for it's better for the founder because they're not stressing as much that they don't have a lead. But to say that, oh, once you have a lead, all is rainbows and butterflies, it is not true.
Gotcha. And Roxanne, was that your experience as well? 70% out of your 150% time?
Yeah, it definitely ended up being a really big time commitment. And I think I'd heard this from like fellow founders, but there's like an emotional component too. It's just very exhausting. It's hard to prioritize anything else because if you suddenly see, a request for a model or something, and this is your number one priority, like I found it kind of almost impossible to not prioritize that. But then it just meant that like sales or growing your team, we were like recruiting a key hire, and we just kind of had to. Thankfully, she did end up joining, but almost like pause on it for a bit because we just realized we couldn't do all of the things that we needed to do given how much the raise was taking out of us. And I was thinking the thing that probably was most helpful for me was we had a couple founders in particular on our in our pre-seed round, and they weren't like huge check sizes, but they were the most helpful people for getting through. Like they can make intros, but I think what was really helpful is just like the psychology of like, you could forward them an email from an investor, be like, what do I do with this? And they'd say like they had perspective that was really valuable. And so I'm really glad that we had founders on our cap table, even if they weren't, like the biggest names in venture or something like that, because I think their advice was just so helpful for fundraising. And that, yeah, I was like very grateful for their perspective.
Was there anything that either of you, and then I'd love to get, actually, if anybody has any questions that they might want to ask live, you can use the hand raise feature. We'd be happy to have people do that. But is there anything about the preparation and the due diligence process that maybe you wish you had spent more time on beforehand, or certain information that you wish you had gathered or done a deeper dive that you wound up sort of having to sort of do on the fly, that maybe had you known it was going to come up or be as big a deal that you would have maybe prepped for?
I mean, for us, a lot of the questions that we hadn't prepped for were like, how does COVID impact your business? Which is like, we're like, what's COVID? It's like mid-March kind of thing. And then I think, Charlie, you would probably know if this is more systematic, but I feel like some of the materials we ended up getting asked for at seed stage were more traditionally Series A, but because everybody was like just trying to figure out this like new world, the diligence was just deeper than I think we had anticipated, and heard from fellow founders that like seed is still about vision and traction and team, and or like less on traction and more just like team and kind of do I believe it or not. And it ended up being, I think, because the perception I got at least is that investors were trying to understand like how are you impacted by a recession or those sorts of things, that the questions ended up being, some of them ended up being more detailed than what we had heard is typical for a seed.
Yeah, I would say that every investor is different. I tend to be sort of this like on both sides kind of, where I like when someone has taken the time to build a model, but I also don't believe in it at all.
Yeah.
Because I find it much more useful to have the conversation about how the business runs with someone who has done that work. Not that I actually think that year 3 is going to be $15.67 million, but just to be able to say, you know, what if you hired 10 salespeople instead of 5, and not guess at what might, I mean, they're all guesses, but like it's a much more productive conversation when somebody knows that level of the business. It's funny because there are other investors that I know who will walk through the sales model as if it's some proof of something, which I don't think is necessarily realistic. I just think it's a structure for the conversation. Where I have spent more time on is being a little more focused on like, okay, so like, where are you in the spring? And like, is this a model that, you know, you have to get back out and fundraise in 6 months? Because like, let's just picture January. And oh, by the way, as someone who, I had started a company and I was on the West Coast pitching in a VC's office the day that Lehman went under. And so like, when I can think of like what shit could hit the fan, I'm like, okay, so imagine that Biden wins the election and Trump decides that there's some inconsistencies or irregularities in mail-in ballots and chooses not to leave.
Yeah.
And here you are, it's January 15th, we're a week away from the inauguration and we don't know what's going to happen. What do you think your chances of fundraising are going to be in January, right? I'm much more comfortable with a plan that like maybe we don't even need to start thinking about it until July of next year, right? So like that's, I mean, you know, look, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but if there was a 0.0001 chance of that happening in any election year, and now it's a 1% chance, that's like 1,000 times greater chance of it happening. And at least sort of we should talk about what that might look like. And so that's what I'm much more focused on.
I guess maybe said another way, I think that the questions like pre-COVID and recession were about like how quickly can you deploy capital and like growth and that sort of thing. And now it seems to have moved a little bit more toward like what's your survival strategy of like, you know, if customers do leave you and you have time to pivot and these sorts of things. And that requires, I think, a more detailed model, which we did, you know, provide, and we had it without revenue just to like be really conservative. But I was just surprised at the level of detail that they were kind of walking through each assumption, you know, what team members were making, all of that. And it makes sense because, you know, I think their fear is like, what if you have to go, to your point, like raise when it's still just a mess again? That's not an ideal situation. I imagine like many people will be kind of frustrated because of course you're asking for money and people are saying you need more money to be viable. And it can be like a really kind of strange, like, well, there's a solution. Yeah, like to parts of this. But yeah, I guess that's what I mean by like the diligence was really focused on things that like for my time at McKinsey, I felt actually poised to answer, but it was less about just like dream with me and kind of thing. And more like if, you know, the compliance market goes under for which we were like a little bit, it was a little bit less scary, but still like those type of disaster scenarios.
Gotcha. Adam, any comments on that?
Yeah, I gave you a thumbs up, I think a couple of minutes ago with the, what about in 2023? I'm like, guys, I'm raising $1 million here. We're not asking for a ton of money in all things considered. This is not a Series B where we have all this traction and it's strictly numbers based. Like, I can put any numbers that you want in an Excel sheet in 2022 or 2023. If that's what you're harping on, I'll just change those numbers. Because as you alluded to, these are all guesses. We have no idea what's going to happen in 3 years with our company. Like if they're trying to harp on strictly what's happening 3 to 4 years down the road, they're probably playing with you or not serious investors. They need to believe in your strategy for the next 18 months. And then if they're liking what you're doing, those numbers will come. So when you're raising a seed round, there shouldn't be that much due diligence, honestly. I'm being very candid here. You don't have that much revenue, that much traction. Your team's small. What I can say is when there are a lot of uncertainties, keep your burn rate as low as possible. That will give investors a lot of comfortability, because if a COVID happens, you don't have 100K in burn and you're out of cash in 2 months. Our burn rate is $16,000 to $17,000. So 100K, if all things hit the fan tomorrow, we can still keep the lights on for 6 months. Keep your burn until you raise your money as low as possible. It'll alleviate a lot of their stress and will help you down the road. But when it comes to the questions that are inconvenient, it's definitely the future. Oh, we're going to 15x in 2022. I have no idea if that's the case. I can write it in an Excel sheet, and if that excites you, great. It's just a guess at this point.
And I think that's what's key, before I get to Lex's question, is just to be able to answer with some kind of confidence. If I told you, could you 15x this business? What resources would you need to be able to answer? So, well, our best guess is we need X, Y, and Z, and this is why I think this, and I'm not making it up out of thin air. It's possible, but it's not a promise. So I think that's the function of models and financials. It's what's possible.
Yeah, and what's nice for us is we're strictly a tech company that is around fantasy sports and sports betting, and we can easily 50x in 12 to 18 months if certain key initiatives hit. And all the investors completely saw that strategy. And if they were like, you're right, if this comes to fruition, you can be a 50x company in 18 months. But strictly if they're looking at 2023 and aren't happy with those numbers, that's an insane thought process, at least from my perspective, being like, you're not understanding. We're raising $1 million. If we are to hit 25 million in rev in 2023, there's clearly going to be more capital that we needed to raise in order to hit those numbers.
Gotcha. So I'll go to these 2 quick questions, and I'll let you guys get back to running your businesses. And I appreciate all the time. So Lex, you're on with your question.
Hey, thank you very much for taking the time. You guys both said how time-intensive raising money, especially at a seed stage, is. How much of a disadvantage does that put you at if you don't have co-founders, if you're doing this on your own, and if you are building out your team and at the same time you're raising money to go hire people?
I'm happy to answer that. So I'm a sole founder, Lex. It is definitely more difficult, not because they don't, well, I don't know what the VCs think in terms, they tell you a lot of things that they're probably just sugarcoating, but if you're non-tech and you're in a tech, I'm a non-tech single founder, so I was probably behind the 8 ball by so many of their standards already. And it is definitely more difficult because you're doing all the outreach. You can't ask your marketing guys or your engineers to be doing that. So it's much more difficult. But again, Lex, if you believe 100% of what you're doing and you have no doubts that you can be successful, then just put in that time and hopefully it'll work out.
I think I have a co-founder. She's the CTO. But one thing that is really helpful is if something good happens around the time that you're raising. And so whether it's like you could have someone working on sales that closes a deal like during the time in which you're on the road, or an article comes out or something like that, that is really helpful. We had something kind of happen right before, which was useful, but certainly not as helpful as if you can just say like, and this big thing just happened. But that might be like one way to at least think about how to leverage the rest of your team, even if it's not a co-founder.
And as Roxanne just alluded to, on anytime something good happens for your company, just shout yourself out on LinkedIn. When you're raising money, LinkedIn is literally like your Instagram to show your company off. That's all LinkedIn, aside from networking and connecting with people. Use your LinkedIn feed to show off achievements and goals that your company is achieving. People will see it.
And how do you guys, last question that we'll have time for, and I appreciate you guys hanging around for it, is how do you think about raising now? Just in terms of like, when is your expectation of when you think it's reasonable to raise additional capital? And like, are you potentially even getting questions or maybe pressure from investors to like add on? Roxanne, have you had that? I know you just closed, but.
Yeah, someone actually just asked me yesterday, so it's like funny. It seems like it was so short amount of time, but the 12 to 18 month like time frame, I think, was just a rough guideline that we had thought about. Let's see. So we aren't getting pressure to add more. We have, I feel like a kind of common thing is after you close a round, then people want to join. And so there's like that kind of strange dynamic going on, but we don't need any more capital. So we've since turned down additional investment, and we're now just like focused on monthly revenue goals and things like that to see how things are going, product improvements, et cetera. And to the earlier point on the model, so we have this like Excel that we felt like overkill at the time, and now I think I'm glad we have it to just see like what we're on pace to do in terms of traction and where that puts us. And I think raising from a position of strength is obviously like a way better position to be in than kind of like, okay, whatever, things aren't going well, I'm raising because we're about to run out of money or something. And so we're just thinking about the metrics that we told investors we would hit, and like thankfully we're on pace. It's still early, but the plan would be kind of the plan as we set it out. I imagine it will get changed, as things continue to develop, but like 12 to 18 month type of, more like 18 month, because we do not like fundraising personally. And so our investors have kind of said like, if you don't love to be out on the road doing it and you've got strong traction from sales, like keep doing that.
Yeah, so similar to Roxanne, we closed a couple months ago. So thankfully I'm not in the fundraising mode during this pandemic. What I can say is we did a 15 to 18 month with what we believe our burn to be. That's what we raised. But even for that, a lot of founders who did that and now raising Series A, they said 6 months into your seed, you should start talking to Series A investors to give yourself that leeway and that wiggle room. What I can imagine it being way different, because obviously everybody's in-house, but again, this could be an opportunity here. Everybody's in front of their computer, so they're going to be seeing, if you're saying something that piques their interest, they will see it. So hit those people up, hit up everyone. And then hopefully in 2 to 3 months, New York City reopens. Pretty much everywhere, you'll already have those first couple of talking points and encounters, and then that cup of coffee will be so much easier. You don't have to have those, hey, how are you? Like you can get straight to the business. So I'm happy that I don't have to go through that right now, but I'm assuming that I'd be able to cope and pivot to being optimal during these times. Gotcha.
Well, listen, thanks everybody for making the time, and this is enormously helpful for the other founders around the table, and we hope we can do this at some point in the future in person, but at least for both of you, excited that you guys are in businesses that don't necessarily rely on that in the short term, and wish you both the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.